welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C., and it looks like that appearance on Coast to Coast AM that I mentioned last week, this is now actually scheduled pretty firmly, I think, for the evening of Saturday, the 28th of June. That is to say, the day when you hear this program is going to be the day. So if you want to stay up late in the night between Saturday and Sunday, the program starts late at night. I'm just trying to get this correct because I've had confusion about Coast to Coast AM in the past because of the time zones. And let's see if we find it. It's in here somewhere. The idea being that it's in the night. You can check the time anyway. Check your local listings for the time when the Coast to Coast AM starts, and I should be on there in the at the first hour in the night between Saturday and Sunday. I'm still trying to find it, but I can't. 1 a.m. Thank you. That's very great help. Thank you so much. But wait. That's I hope that's Eastern. Yes, Eastern. Okay, 1 a.m. Eastern. All right. Now, the first order of business, I guess, has to be the memorialization of 100 years since the beginning of the First World War, one of the most colossal tragedies in all of human history. And, of course, these Serbian nationalists, terrorists, whatever they were, of the Black Hand were acting as British agents. The British Freemasonic lodges of King Edward VII had totally penetrated Freemasonry in southeastern Europe, and we have this very interesting book. Maybe I can find that for you for the second hour. Anyway, take a look at the Tarpley Twitter feed. I'll undoubtedly refer to it in the next couple of days. In the afternoon of the Sarajevo assassination, we had an important British journalist, writer, who goes around London, and he finds that a lot of the important people, the bosses that he knows, are waiting for news from Sarajevo. They say, has the news from Sarajevo come in yet? Has it come in yet? Has it come in yet? And of course, he's mystified until the news actually arrives. And then his conclusion is that there was pre-concert being the older and more polite word for conspiracy. Oh, my God, conspiracy. We don't try to explain everything based on conspiracy, but when you find it, well, there it is, right? If it's an empirical fact, there it is. And remember, U.S. prosecutors put people in jail for conspiracy every day of the week. So if you don't believe in it, then you've got a very strange law code to reflect that. So the British. Now, you can look in tarpley.net in the website, and you will see my study of King Edward VII, and that's also available in book form, right? It's been printed up by Progressive Press. Unfortunately, not all of it is there. That's an oversight, which is regrettable, but there it is. And that part that you do have is the assembly of the alliance systems by King Edward VII personally. Now, he, of course, died in 1910, 1911, but he had assembled the Triple Entente. He had done the British-French Entente Cordiale of 1903. He had set up the British alliance with Japan against Germany and Russia in the Far East, and then he was able to close the ring with the Entente Cordiale with Russia, 1907, 1908, and at that point everything was in place, and it was only a question of time until something would set off that machine, and then you'd have the cataclysm. The goal of the war was to secure another 100 years of domination for the British Empire. And, of course, it backfired. And that is the main thing to understand about oligarchical scheming is it doesn't work. And if you have libertarian websites that are telling you that the entire world is proceeding according to some secret plan of some secret oligarch, that is just baloney. The whole story of oligarchy is that their plans don't work. Take the case of the Roman Empire. Do you think the fall of the Roman Empire was what the Roman elite wanted, the senatorial class? Was that their goal? No, it clearly was not their goal. But was that the result of their harebrained oligarchical scheming? It was. So the problem is the level of epistemology where you have oligarchies that consistently do things that lead to the collapse of civilization. That is why oligarchy cannot be allowed to rule without being checked and contained, be it by tribunes of the people or the Machiavellian system of divided, mixed government with the three branches and so forth. All of that coming from Machiavelli's discourses. So, 100 years ago. And what it also reminds us is at this point in recent centuries, more or less, world wars have a way of beginning. We don't know why, but the empirical fact is there. No fetishism, no artificial construction of cycles, but simply the War of the League of Cambrai, 1509. It was a world war. Everybody in Europe against Venice initially, except the English, and then when the English came in, it went through a half a dozen or more combinations and permutations, which I've written about. That's the War of the League of Cambrai. Beginning of 1600, 1618, the defenestration of Prague, and the beginning of the 30 Years' War, the worst, proportionally, in European history. 1/3 to 1/2 of the population of Central Europe exterminated in the 30 Years' War. Beginning of the 1700s, we get the War of the Spanish Succession. This is the William of Orange, the Anglo-Dutch crushing Louis XIV and the power created by Richelieu and Mazarin. And this was not good for the world. Then at the beginning of the 1800s, the Napoleonic Wars, the Wars of the French Revolution, and then the Napoleonic Wars. And then, 100 years ago, 1914. So now it's 2014. At the Russian forum last week, as I think I mentioned, I asked Ambassador Jack Matlock, who had been in Russia for Reagan, Soviet Union, are we in July 1914? And he said, no, he didn't think we were. I'm not so sure. And I think it's necessary to act with one eye pointed to 1918 and 1914 and try to avoid historical conflagrations, catastrophic developments that are caused in many cases by small groups of meddlers, oligarchs, people like Barroso. You look at that Portuguese fascist, he's insignificant. But today they've signed the deal between the European Union on the one side, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova on the other. What is the point of that? Wasn't there anybody to tell him to cool it? Not now, Barroso. Let your successor, Juncker, Monsieur Juncker, is going to come in as the EU commish president, despite the resistance of Cameron and Orban of Hungary. This is actually funny. The Luxembourgeois. We don't just have the bourgeoisie in Europe anymore. We have the Luxembourgeoisie, and the head of that banking establishment is Monsieur Juncker. I would think that it's time for Cameron to resign after this defeat and clear the air. In any case, let me repeat what Cohen had to say, Professor Stephen Cohen, at the Russian-U.S. forum last week, that there is huge pressure on Putin to launch a no-fly zone, and that there is a significant danger of tactical nuclear warfare. And I'm glad that he essentially shares the view, which I have put forward in every forum I could access since 2004 already, in the Orange Revolution, that the Ukraine is the most dangerous real estate in the world because you have nuclear powers on both sides of a potential confrontation. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. on Saturday, the 28th of June to the early morning hours of Sunday, the 29th of June, depending on where you are. Looks like one 1 a.m. Eastern, it's going to be the time for yours truly to appear on Coast to Coast AM, and this will focus largely around Putin and the question of World War III, and at the same time, Iraq, Syria, Iran, and other possible theaters of war. So please do tune in. I want to thank Richard Sirett. You should listen to this program, the Conspiracy Hour, which is on in the Zoomer Radio of Toronto every Sunday evening at 11 to midnight Eastern Time, often very interesting guests. And he will be, I think, the guest host on the Saturday night edition of the Coast to Coast AM. Now, back to this stuff. What does it mean for Barroso, right? The European meddlers, right? This when Victoria Nuland says blankety blank the EU, she's talking about Barroso, and somehow the bungling, even as an imperialist, Barroso, he represents Weltmachtruina Portugal, right? The ruin of a world power. That mentality seems to live on in him, the Salazar fascism of Portugal. So Barroso has now, let's call him Bozo for short, but Bozo Barroso has decided that it's time to sign the deal with Ukraine, Moldova. Moldova is that piece of what used to be Romania, then it was transferred to the Soviets. It's the extreme southwest corner, I guess, of the Soviet Union. So Moldova, of course, like all the other nomenclatura oligarch states, became so-called independent. But at that point, then, a slice of that, the so-called Transdniester area, decided that they would resecede. It's just like West Virginia. We know all this, right? Just what West Virginia did to Virginia. Virginia left the Union. West Virginia left. Virginia went back to the Union. Same stuff with Moldova. And then, of course, Georgia, where we're familiar with the fascist phonetications of the tin pot demagogue Saakashvili, who almost got a world war going in 2008. You'll remember Cheney wanted to bomb the southern end of the tunnel that Russia was using to send in reinforcements. Now, this is the economic association. The political part had already been signed. Political part says Ukraine must align itself with the foreign policy goals of the European Union. That means NATO. That is a feature of the Lisbon Treaty. So they've already come on board politically. Now economically. I don't know whether they've published the entire content. I rather doubt it, but we'll see in the coming days of what this association is. This is the one that Yanukovych said was not good enough. And I suspect Yanukovych is going to be revealed as a clairvoyant and a prophet, because you'll remember what this is. Double the price of gas, right, natural gas. Go ahead and turn the pipeline system over to Chevron. Give the Black Earth region away to foreigners. Bring in Ruhrstahl and Ruhrkohle and let them take over the Donetsk, Donbass, and Krivoy Rog heavy industrial complex, right, which was, I think I mentioned, when I was in grade school, I wrote a paper about the Donetsk, Donbass as one of, or perhaps the most heavily industrialized regions in the entire world at that time. So, David Ignatius, speaking for the CIA and the State Department on National Pentagon Radio, it points to the basic weakness of the Putin position. And, of course, it's true. It is a defensive position. It is not really seizing the initiative unless you look at it sort of tactically. Let me point out a very interesting talk by Sergei Glaziev. Glaziev, of course, someone that we like. We want to follow him. We brought up his proposals at the U.S.-Russia Forum. You'll remember that Wayne Murray of the State Department and the Pentagon said he hoped for the victory of Kudrin over Glaziev. And we also had the Nemtsov representative, the Union of Right-Wing Forces, Soyuz Pravich Sil, said that Glaziev was crazy and a communist, actually, also. Of course, he is a dirigist. He's like Alexander Hamilton. And we'll talk about an economic proposal in a minute. Glaziev says genocide is now being practiced by Poroshenko against the Donbass and the reintroduction of serfdom under the IMF and European Union conditionalities. The Troika, as we've known it in Greece and Spain and so forth. Glaziev points to an ideologue by the name of Liashko, Liashko, or something like that, depending on your transliteration system. Essentially, this is one of the leading Nazi ideologues. Glaziev points out that if Ukraine had kept a certain number of neutron bombs, they would have used them. They would have used the neutron bomb in Slavyansk, in Lugansk, and places like this. And remember, we have Timoshenko in a telephone conversation actually saying that the people in eastern Ukraine should be exterminated with nuclear war. Continuing with Glaziev, the U.S. is de facto at war with Russia. The time, however, is on the side of the Nazi forces. And he points out, as I have, that economically speaking, once these conditionalities are enacted, you can reckon with the collapse of the regime to some extent or other. But he points out then in Georgia, there was no collapse of the Saakashvili regime, and instead the regime simply morphed into something different. But you can see it's still on a full anti-Russian line. Time is not on the side of Russia, says Glaziev. This is a factor of pressure on Putin, because a lot of people believe this, and they may be right. He says the militarization goes like this. There is essentially a process of manufacturing Nazi cadre in the Ukraine. Right? It takes time to train them, to indoctrinate them, to give them military training. Right? This is done by right sector and so forth. In December, as the riots were at their height or approaching their height, 2,000 Nazis were available. A little bit later, it was 9 or 10,000 of these Nazis. By the summer, by May, it's 50,000 Nazis available. By the summer, say July, August, 100,000 Nazis. By September, 200,000 Nazis, and by December, 500,000 indoctrinated Nazis with some kind of military training in Ukraine. That's the danger. Kharkov factories are working overtime. 200 tanks are now in use in the east, and that is a pretty serious situation. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Saturday, the 28th of June, overnight, 1 a.m. in the morning Eastern Time, and so forth. And I'll be on Coast to Coast AM. All right, so it's 100 years since the beginning of World War I. Glaziev is pointing to a build-up to a large war in Central Europe. We've got another guy, Yevgeny Fyodorov, who's telling us about attempts to create a color revolution inside Russia. Well, we've known that, right? That was McFaul. He failed. And Navalny, but also Limonov and Kasparov are that. But that's very limited. And maybe Russian society has defense mechanisms. The Eurogarchs and Euromedlers, they've just had their summit, right? One side of the summit is these attacks on Russia through Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. The other one, of course, the feud now between Cameron, who is the city of London, and the Eurocrat federalist types around the Juncker as EU commish, and that will have to go down to the European Parliament. Our candidate was Tsipras. We have nothing to do with any of this, but we're happy to see oligarchs fighting among themselves, and the reason for that, of course, is lifeboat ethics in the ruling class. The Depression means that not every faction can survive. Therefore, they fight. Suffice it to say, the City of London can never leave Europe in any meaningful way, because without their ability to parasitize and sack and loot European production, they would be nowhere. This is also one of the points from Glaziev. He points out that the Russian central bank is essentially a tool of the U.S. Federal Reserve. It only issues rubles against dollar reserve. So he has taken aim at Nabulina, the head of the Russian central bank, who is in there with Greff and Kudrin and others in the neoliberal side, right? And this is actually the fifth column in Russia, the pro-Western faction, but it's not pro-Western in any good way. It's pro-Western in the sense of pro-Wall Street. Let's call it that. Now, Putin has sent planes to Iraq. This is amazing. The U.S. has been stalling on F-16s that Maliki wanted because they say, oh, you're going to use them against the Kurds or somebody else, or you're going to give them to the Iranians. Putin has now arranged to send in some pretty formidable Russian planes. They're used, but they can be there in 2 to 3 days. And apparently the pilots are trained for them. You'll remember the Iraqi Air Force was destroyed, right? It had to flee into Iran in the first Gulf War of 1990 to 91. All right, so Putin is now asserting a Russian role in Iraq. The U.S. will go bonkers. Notice also that Syria, Assad, has been helping to stem the tide against ISIS by bombing them. They have bombed them quite effectively, both on the Syrian side of the border and on the Iraqi side of the border. But on the other hand, what we've got in Washington is still the hate Maliki hour. The reflex of demonization of some foreign figure is so tremendous that they just can't get away from it. They want Alawi, it's clear, but they think that by blaming their problems on Maliki, they can somehow solve them or continue. Notice that Obama is continuing to stall and offer token concessions to the warmongers, right? The drones being sent in against ISIS, that's typical Obama, and it's reprehensible, but it's, what's it going to be, drones or 5 divisions? You tell me. This is the debate in Washington right now. If you don't like that debate, you do something to change it. The Assad regime, of course, could be helped to destroy the bases of ISIS, but they don't want to do that because they've got this unfortunate, irrational hostility to Assad, even though the idea of supporting Assad got grudging acceptance by 1 or 2 participants on National Pentagon Radio this morning. When a guy called in, Sam called in to say, it's time to support Assad, you dolts. True. Ignatius is still holding on to the idea that the Arab Spring was a bottom-up revolution and real. Of course, was a color revolution imposed by CIA, MI6, NATO intelligence, Saudis, Qatar, and others. So, the extent of the involvement by the U.S. now are the drones, sure to create a backlash, the 500 troops on the ground, and now the demand for training facilities. This is interesting. The Washington Post has to admit that there has been the covert training facility in Jordan all along, but that now that's going to be increased. Now, the covert training facility is the one that we identified last week as being the training ground for ISIS. That's where ISIS comes from. So look at this. We're going to have a new wave of ISIS trained under the guise of fighting ISIS. The headline, Obama seeks funds to train Syrian rebels, and we're told that the training would probably take place in Jordan, where the CIA is currently training Syrian opposition forces, and possibly in Turkey. But these are, of course, the money would expand a CIA covert training program, which is already included in a $66 billion request for the Pentagon's Overseas Contingency Operations, OCO. So now it's being revealed in retrospect. But that is where ISIS was trained. So what are they going to do? You're going to train more ISIS, or are you going to retool somebody to try to fight against ISIS? And remember, they keep talking about the Free Syrian Army. It no longer exists. The best information I can see on Réseau Voltaire is that General Idris fled to Doha, or the Gulf, the Emirates maybe, but the number 2 and the number 3 are in Sweden and in Holland. So there's also great lamentation that the U.S. did not attack Syria sooner. Remember that Panetta, Petraeus, Madame Clinton, and the White House chief of staff at the time wanted a bombing program, right? In effect, and now they didn't get it. So this is now the disarray is considerable. The Kerry, Secretary of State of Skull and Bones, is complaining that Assad is attacking. Well, what is it that you want, Kerry? Right? Do you want to stop ISIS, or are you going to attack Syria? It reminds me of the time when the State Department had a dual containment program against Iran and Iraq, even though they were at war. The official policy, not the real one, but the verbal policy, was to contain and isolate them both. So the other thing that's happening more and more is that we're hearing the 9/11 theory for the first time in quite a while. They're falling back on the idea that in the face of a lot of people who say, we don't care what happens in Iraq, they will have to figure that out for themselves. We're being told again, oh no, that would be a sanctuary from which a new 9/11 attack would be mounted against the homeland. And I simply, I think this is intellectual garbage of the worst type, moral and intellectual degradation, and I refer you to my book on the subject, especially the 5th edition of 9/11 Synthetic Terror, made in USA. So that is essentially this chaotic, grim situation that we see in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, and the Middle East, as we mark the 100th anniversary on Saturday the 28th of the assassination of the Archduke and the Archduchess in Sarajevo. And the question remains, are we in some kind of slow-motion extended July 1914? And the problem is we may well be. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Crisis Radio, we have some interesting guests coming up in the second hour, so let's try to cruise through here. We got to talk about the Export-Import Bank. One of the byproducts of the defeat of Cantor in the Republican primary here a couple of weeks ago has been that the refunding, the bill that would prolong the existence of the U.S. Export-Import Bank has now gone into crisis, and it's got to be passed by October 1st, or there will be no more U.S. Export-Import Bank. Think of it, a New Deal institution launched under the auspices of Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1934 to promote U.S. exports, and in particular in recent years, high technology exports, will be simply destroyed. By who? By the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, the predator Jeb Hensarling. This is a sinister figure, and as this regime breaks up, we see these dubious figures and worse come forward. We see the Sasse phenomenon, people grabbing at power. We see Hillary Clinton, but then we see Hensarling, and his scenario goes like this. He would have been a candidate to become the majority leader in the House with the departure of Cantor, but he decided to wait, and his game is now going to be try to become Speaker at the end of this year. And if Hensarling becomes Speaker, you will have a Tea Party predator 2 heartbeats away from the presidency, right? Because the president, the vice president, and the Speaker of the House, he is trying to use the destruction of the Export-Import Bank to gather steam and support among the crazed Republican Tea Party base and use that to become Speaker of the House. And then, of course, in a troubled time, the sky's the limit once you're there. So here's how it goes. The Export-Import Bank, does not really give very many loans. It provides export credit guarantees. In other words, you sell a lot of machinery to somebody in the Democratic Republic of Congo. How are you going to be sure that they will pay you back? This is an insurance policy that money will be paid back. So it allows you to significantly increase your exports. It is a money-making proposition. The Export-Import Bank earns $1 billion in cash money, which is deposited every year. So this is costing the U.S. taxpayer nothing. It is actually diminishing the deficit in a number of ways. One, by paying money into the Treasury, and the other way by supporting about 250,000 jobs in absolutely critical high-tech industries in many cases, right? Aircraft is number one. General Electric, jet engines, Boeing, and other corporations take part. If more people, by the way, had attractive high technology exports, they could be taking part too. But of course, if you have derivatives, it's much harder, isn't it? So maybe that's the key. The fact that this export guarantee is available means that the interest rate goes down, and therefore the Wall Street parasites, finance oligarchs don't want this. They don't like it ideology-wise. This is a dirigistic institution. Alexander Hamilton would get this right away. Friedrich List, Henry Carey, Abraham Lincoln, Justin Morrill, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who brought it into existence. This is the Export-Import Bank. China has one. It's 3 times bigger, 4 times bigger. Canada has one. It's 3 times bigger. European Union, France has it. COFAS, Germany has it. Hermes credits, on and on. Everybody in the world has it. So what Hensarling wants is unilateral disarmament. And as we had Congressman Meeks from the Black Caucus come into this hearing, where Maxine Waters of the Black Caucus was supportive of the Export-Import Bank. Congressman Brad Sherman of California was supportive. Meeks came in and said, I can't believe it. Everybody else in the world is figuring out new ways to promote and facilitate and foster high technology exports as the indispensable path to the future. Here in the United States, we're discussing whether or not to destroy the underfunded and undersized, inadequate institution which we already have. It is truly a monstrosity. If you go to Hensarling's district, the business people in Texas want the Exim Bank. I saw another article from the New Orleans Times-Picayune. They want it there because all of those exports, a lot of them go through the port of New Orleans and on and on. The business community in general wants it. But this Hensarling, this predator, 5th District of Texas, make a note of it, he should not be there. He has come forward. Now, the question is why? One obvious thing is Wall Street, right? Wall Street does not like the role of the Export-Import Bank in keeping the interest rates down. They want that extra usury for their balance sheet. They don't like the idea of dirigism. Dirigism might spread. Dirigism, of course, good for America, bad for Wall Street predators and finance oligarchs. And then there's the question of the Chinese, right? Now, we have to look at this. We've talked about the Polish Republic in the 1700s and how it was destroyed by foreign parties. You'll remember, in the Polish Diet, there were parties that you could identify with Russia, with Prussia, with Austria, with France in particular, and so on down the line, right? Everybody in the Polish parliament was pretty much a paid agent of one or more of those foreign countries. Social science literature up to now has ignored the possibility of entire factions of the U.S. Congress acting as foreign agents, that is to say, as bribed operatives for foreign interests. But it's clear anybody who looks at it would have to say there's always been a powerful British party in the Congress. There's been an Israeli party, which is well known. There's also, however, a Chinese party. There may be a party on certain issues that could be considered French or Brazilian or others. The point is, Citizens United and the dark pools set up under Citizens United make it possible to bribe, to control, to influence, manipulate members of Congress. it's not even necessary for the member of Congress to know it. In other words, Hensarling is not necessarily a convinced Maoist who reads the little red book in the privacy of his home. But still, objectively speaking, right, in terms of the effect of what he does, he is acting for a Chinese and foreign interest, European Union and Chinese interest. So in Beijing, they're going to love him. In Brussels, they're going to love him. And in Wall Street, they're going to love him. And I guess he thinks that's enough. So, American people, remember that the price of these policies has an extra price that you're going to pay under our system, the price of learning Chinese so that you can take orders. And this, I think, is no future for the United States. Bad for the world as well, right? Not good for this pendulum to swing so far the other way. If you destroy the Export-Import Bank, you're very likely to destroy a large part of that 250,000 jobs. And remember, those are the assembly lines that you've got to have in the 21st century, right, where advanced electrical and avionic and aerospace products are manufactured. That's what the Export-Import Bank supports. Now, right now, the Export-Import Bank borrows from the U.S. Treasury and must add 1 full % to the interest rate by law. This obviously tremendous mistake. It's a tremendous hindrance. What we need is 0% export credit. Where could we get that? From the export window of the nationalized Federal Reserve Bank. Now, remember, we've got the Tarpley for Fed head campaign. I'm not a candidate to become the president of the Export-Import Bank, but I am candidate to become the governor of the Board of Governors, the head of it, of the Federal Reserve System. And under those conditions, I would make sure that at least $1 trillion in the first year, $1 trillion of 0% federal loans, federal credit, would be available, and that would be the lending authority. Right now, the Export-Import Bank has a lending authority of about $150 billion. That's inadequate. And again, China, these other places, 3, 4, 5, 6 times more. Totally wrong. So we've got to gear up the Export-Import Bank, and this guy, Hensarling, has got to be exposed. And maybe this is a way to defeat those reactionary Republicans in November. Back in a minute. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. Remember, if you get a chance, tune in on the night of Saturday the 28th. In other words, the first day you can hear this program and listen to me on Coast to Coast AM. But now we want to go to the sidewalks of New York, or at least of New York State, and get an update from Randy Credico, who is running for governor. He wants to be the Democratic nominee for governor, and therefore he's going up against the Wall Street puppet, Andrew Cuomo. And Randy, maybe you can help us. The race has become more crowded. It was that you, for quite a few weeks, were the only challenger to Cuomo. Now we seem to have Zephyr Teachout coming in. Can you give us the lowdown on that?
Well, she's a Howard Dean Obama Democrat that nearly beat Andrew Cuomo for the Working Families Party nomination at their convention, but it was always going to go with Andrew. They teased their rank and file a little bit, the Working Families Party, and nobody wanted to challenge him, so she somehow ascended to the top. You know, she was like 50th, their choice, and so there was a 40% anti-Cuomo vote that was always there, and she got it. Wasn't because of her. It was really an anti-Cuomo vote. And now she's decided to run for the Democratic nomination. She got that 15 minutes of fame, and she's taken some of my platform and espousing it. But I had already been in this thing for 2 weeks when she decided to parachute in. And we're well on our way to get on the ballot. I don't know if she is. We're doing very well. She hasn't adopted my tax Wall Street leitmotif economic plan. I did talk to her about it, that's got to be her key issue, is economically, that we have to push that statewide, and hopefully the dominoes will roll after that.
I think you're absolutely right. That is a principled, issue-oriented question that is not ad hominem, that is not That's what politics should be made of. In other words, if you're really trying to offer an alternative to Cuomo, what's wrong with Cuomo? He's a Wall Street puppet. So then you've got to prove that you're not a Wall Street puppet, and the only way to do that, really, at this stage of the game, is tax Wall Street. It's not enough to badmouth them or diss them. If she's not going with tax Wall Street, what is she going with?
Well, I don't know. I mean, obviously she's coming up with Howard Dean kind of policies. You know, she's talking about her. I heard on a radio show the other day, and all she talked about was the Comcast Time Warner deal. But of course, the state can't really do anything about that. That's you should run for senator if you want to stop that, because that's interstate commerce. But I agree with that. I really don't know all of her policies. They're progressive policies, but not as strong as mine. Like I said, the Wall Street sales tax. I've been talking about that. I ran last year with the Tax Wall Street Party, so you know where I stand there. I'm right out there up front. Cuomo has repealed the bank tax, the small bank tax. The Wall Street, they pay a sales transfer tax, but it's immediately refunded. So whatever they put in goes right back. I don't even know why they go through the process.
What does Zephyr Teachout say about that? This is one of the great scandals.
Well, she doesn't know it. It's like having to talk about the Export-Import Bank, Import-Export Bank, what you were just talking about. She doesn't know. She's been in New York 5 years, which is the same amount as any kid here that's in kindergarten. So she doesn't know the history of the state. She parachuted in, and she's got a lot of questionable qualifications in terms of her residency in this state. So I don't know. You know, I would think that, she's from Massachusetts, you know, and you have that one guy from Massachusetts. Scott Brown just moved to New Hampshire. Bobby Kennedy came from Massachusetts. You had William Weld a few years back. He was going to run for governor. There's something about the Bay State where people want to go and carpet bag in other states. And she just doesn't know anything about the state. So she doesn't know about the Port Authority and about the Metropolitan Transportation Authority and all these other authorities. When the Erie Canal was built, Johnson's Shoe Factory up there in the Tri-City area of Binghamton. You got to know something. You got to go out there, not just throw out a bunch of cliches, Occupy Wall Street cliches, you know. Which, absolutely. You know, I was
as a former New York State Senate candidate, I would urge people to think about that great industrial area along the Erie Canal, Albany, Utica, and on over. And that is now a severely depressed area. When Hillary Clinton ran for Senate, she took a listening tour. She promised jobs for upstate New York and has failed miserably to deliver on that.
The only jobs that are created upstate New York are the ones for prison guards. There are 40 prisons along the Highway 90 there, right? 40 prisons up there. And so people are fighting to get jobs as guards, you know, or administrators in the prisons. And so that's all you have up there. Remember, Johnson's Shoe Factory, which was called welfare capitalism back in 1920, 1930, he gave great wages and great programs and hospitals and everything. They produced 57 million pairs of shoes a year. And so that city right now in the southern tier that area is completely devastated economically, and nothing's happening. And if we tax Wall Street, if we were to tax Wall Street, you know, the 1% sales tax, I am not a tenth of percent, not a half percent, the 1% Wall Street sales transfer tax, that would underwrite all of the programs and all of the jobs. We could have a great, and it's cliche to say FDR. You know, we always say FDR style program, but you know, we could create a lot of jobs by rebuilding the infrastructure up there and putting money into industry.
Correct, and I think that's important. And I think
to rekindle the area.
This stress that you have on the mass traction, working class, working people, life or death economic issues, I'm afraid this does not seem to be prominent in Ms. Teachout's approach.
No, it's not. Absolutely. Well, she's talking about, it's typical liberal rhetoric is what you hear from her. She just doesn't have a handle on the state. She's not talking about a state bank. We should have a state bank like North Dakota has a state bank, and a whole bunch of other issues and economic plans that you have finally articulated for the last 5 years that I've been listening to you.
And I must say, if a state bank is too radical for Mrs. Teachout, then that indicates a level of timidity, because a state bank, as you say, it's not like it's some pie in the sky thing. One already exists, and it's useful. It won't end a depression, but there's no reason not to have one.
I don't know. I think she may be the faux candidate, to get my way. I don't know where she came from, but I was the only person that was running against Andrew. I had laid the groundwork, about 8 months ago. I worked with the guy years ago. I know his MO. I know who controls him. We talked about this, the blank fine Goldman Sachs gives him a lot of money. Alphonse D'Amato is his biggest bundler. So you have the big pharmaceutical companies giving him money. You have the banks giving him money. You have Wall Street giving him money. So that is what Andrew Cuomo represents. It's okay. If he wants to represent that, that's fine. I'm the challenger to that. And then suddenly she steps in, and it waters down the opposition to him.
Now, Randy, when you get
and that should be something that should be stressed, is if she takes the attention off the Wall Street sales tax and takes attention away from the state bank and the bank tax, then she's done a disservice to this critical election coming up.
That's our time is up, so we're talking Credico 2014, Credico2014.com, I think.
Yes, that's
Please
it.
Go there, take a look, join in. And Randy, you got to distribute those signatures in the congressional districts, right? I hope you're doing that.
Yes, I got them in. I got 19 covered already. I only need 14.
See you soon.
All right?
See you next week, possibly, huh? Bye-bye. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So as we roll on, once again, the vast panorama of struggle, I believe we can now take you to Nebraska. Am I right? Okay,
hello,
wonderful. So here we go. This is now the United States Senate from Nebraska, and as we know, we have this very dubious Republican candidate, Ben Sasse, who tries to combine the Tea Party with the Country Club, but he does it from the point of view of the intersection of the CIA, the FBI, and the Justice Department, which was the world that he inhabited. He's also a former top official of the Bush-era Health and Human Services, not exactly a credential where he worked with Utah Governor Mike Leavitt, former, who had been so heavily involved in those scandals, right, the Salt Lake City Olympics and all that corruption that Mitt Romney had to go in and clean up and indeed hush up. So the meaningful challenger, as a number of national journalists have now agreed on, is the real challenger to Sasse is not so much the Democrat domina, but it's Dan Buhrdorf of the Tax Wall Street Party, and that's Dan for Nebraska on the internet. So let's go now to Nebraska. We're getting a report. It's a similar situation. It's getting the signatures to get on the ballot, right? The elementary basic work of democracy, where the rubber meets the road. Dan, welcome. Let us know how it's going.
Webster. Thank you very much, Webster. I really appreciate the time that you give me on your show. I'd like to talk about the Export-Import Bank for a moment, if I could.
Great.
This really affects Nebraska, and it is a public resource for U.S. manufacturers and farmers. We have a lot of foolish and corrupt politicians calling this crony capitalism, and we can assume that Ben Sasse will be one of them. So here are a few of the dozens of Nebraska businesses.
If I just get it right, I looked the last couple of days. Ben Sasse has not taken a position on this so far, right?
Not that I'm aware of, but he has surrogates always talking about crony capitalism. And so I think if we take a look at some of the Nebraska businesses helped by the Export-Import Bank over the last few years, we'll see how important this is to Nebraska. Now, the bank financed $112 million to Lindsay Corporation in Lindsay, Nebraska, for irrigation equipment and road equipment. And the bank financed $28 million to Chief Industries in Kearney, Nebraska, for products like steel building materials and powder coating. And the bank financed over $78 million to Preferred Popcorn in Chapman, Nebraska. Now, this is a 100% farmer-owned company that sells Nebraska popcorn to 55 countries around the world. And corrupt politicians want to kill the last of our manufacturing, and I won't let them. Webster, have you heard the quote by Representative Greg Meeks?
I mentioned it before, but please, if you've got the text, read it word for word. I heard
Sure,
I've
got it right here.
Very impressive.
Yes, I agree. Representative Greg Meeks is a Democrat from New York, and he was typical of the bank's supporters, saying, in the midst of record trade deficits, this is quoting, in the midst of record trade deficits, we are here debating, I can't believe this, we are debating whether or not we need to reauthorize the Ex-Im Bank. And then he continued, the Chinese and the Europeans and the Brazilians and the Japanese all must be looking at us, shaking their heads in complete disbelief that we're actually debating this issue. They would, that we could actually voluntarily, purposefully kill American industries and hundreds of thousands of American jobs. It's unbelievable to me. Meeks lamented. End of the quote. So when a Democrat like Alan Grayson from Florida says the Export-Import Bank, and this is quoting, it's a corporate welfare at its worst, he's talking about cutting off the lifeline to Nebraska farmers and manufacturers. This financing isn't not a gift. It's repaid to the bank and has earned $2 billion for American taxpayers over the last 5 years. And I'm not interested in punishing Nebraskans and Nebraska producers so that China or other clever countries can swoop in on their contracts. I want to help American businesses profit so that they can employ people and grow our economy.
So what you've got now is Boehner and Henserling and McCarthy. So you got Boehner, right, the speaker, you've got McCarthy, the new majority leader, who flipped on this issue. As long as he was just representing California as the majority whip, McCarthy was in favor of the Export-Import Bank. Now that he's got to represent this gaggle of parliamentary types, including the Tea Party, he's now against it. And then we've got Henserling, who is the key guy because he's the chairman of the committee. So they're all against it. So I think Sasse is going to have to answer on this, and I know you'll be holding his feet to the fire. And the question really is, are you a member of the Chinese faction, Ben? Are you a Maoist underneath all of that camouflage you've got? Please, Ben, we want to know.
Sure. And that I think that he should come out and say whether or not he supports the Export-Import Bank. Nebraskans want to know, definitely. I want to know. And just because I'm the growth candidate doesn't mean I'm not an environmental candidate, Webster. Because, as you know, I have a plan to rebuild the national infrastructure for the 21st century, and that plan will include new technologies to make the grid and new energy production much more efficient, making my campaign and the Tax Wall Street Party one of the few organized parties with a plan to save great amounts of energy while producing clean and safe energy. And we have a plan on how to pay for it and create jobs while doing it. So there are many
people are worried about emissions. You could, with the proper policies on urban mass transit and related things, you can take millions of cars off the road and save millions of man hours that are now spent sitting in traffic jams. But that's maybe more of an urban issue. But certainly you're absolutely right.
Sure, and we can also save. We have a lot of power stations in Nebraska that have to transport this energy across the grid, and we need a 21st century grid to keep it efficient as well. So
okay, but
yes,
how are you doing on the nuts and bolts?
Well, we're plugging right along, and we're getting we've made some breakthroughs. This week we had one of our petitioners have a breakthrough week or breakthrough day and a breakthrough week. We have Joe Johnson, Ellie Frankie, and Brian Walsh. They're all continuing to be very hardworking and strong petitioners for me. And Ellie had a breakout day this week, coming through with a lot of signatures. Joe and Brian petition in the mornings and afternoons when they aren't at their day job. And I want to give a shout out to John and Matt, who are running a team that is a Second Amendment coalition made up of members of Anonymous and Tea Party non-interventionists. And they've mobilized, and they've joined us and are out petitioning. And now they're sold on mobilizing the Fed and not ending it. And now they can see how important the national bank can be, as intended by our founders. And you can see some of these pictures at Twitter, StanForNebraska.com, and Facebook,
StanForNebraska.com. Go there, contribute, help, and we'll hear from you again next week.
And we need help at danfornebraska@gmail.com.
Okay.
Thank you, Webster. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now we have a special guest, I think for the first time on our program. It's an old friend. Wayne Madsen is certainly one of the most celebrated investigative journalists operating in and on the federal government in Washington, but also farther afield out in the States. And for quite a number of years, he has been the editor-in-chief of the Wayne Madsen Report. I urge you to go and read it. You're going to need to subscribe, but it's worth every penny. So that's Wayne Madsen Report on the Internet. And, over the years, there are too many stories to mention now that Wayne has contributed to. Right now, he's fresh from a investigative visit, the typical shoe leather reporting in Nebraska, and among other things, this is going to cast some important light on the political background of this big Nebraska Senate race, right? Ben Sasse and everything that goes with it, and we also have to go back, I think, maybe 25 years to the last time many people heard about Nebraska, which was a terrific scandal that had roots in Nebraska, but then seemed to reach all the way into the Reagan White House. And it's just about, 25 years ago now that we had that famous headline about call boys being taken on a nighttime tour of the White House by Reagan administration officials. So we've got to get back to that world, unfortunately, and no better guide than Wayne Madsen. Wayne, welcome.
Hi, Webster. Good to be with you.
So, you've just been out there in Lincoln and other places. I know you made some side trips to Abilene and the Eisenhower Library and the Truman Library. But what about Nebraska, first of all?
Right. What about Nebraska? Yeah, that should be the that should be the political motto of the year. With this guy Ben Sasse coming basically from 4% name recognition in the state, beating, at least two better known and better funded candidates. One, Shane Osborne, who was the pilot of that U.S. Navy electronic intelligence aircraft that was forced to land in Hainan Island back in April of 2001. He was actually the favored candidate. Then there was another one who was better known than owner of a bank, actually, one of Nebraska's most well-known banks, Pinnacle Bank. But this guy Sasse, basically, no one glommed onto this whole Tea Party slate. Although his background would suggest he's anything but Tea Party. He's basically a very establishment Republican figure, having worked in many different federal agencies under George W. Bush. He came from relative obscurity to win the nomination, but the bad news for Nebraska is that he has had his name associated with another House page scandal, not the original one from the midnight tours of the White House, but a more recent one, 1996 to 1998. He was a proctor and tutor for the House pages. That's, by the way, it was partly because of that scandal, underage pages being preyed upon by Republican congressmen, including Mark Foley of Florida and Jim Colby of Arizona, is largely the reason why the program has been disestablished. So he was involved with that, but also, oddly enough, as a non-lawyer with a degree in theology from Harvard, was in charge of formulating torture policy for the Justice Department under Attorney General John Ashcroft. So we've got a candidate here who looks very much to be out of the mold of not the Tea Party, but the Christian Dominionist movement. And that's a very little known, but probably the most powerful right-wing religious groups in the United States today.
And just maybe another word or two about that, the Dominionists, right? Is that house where they all live together?
Yes, it's the C. I call it the C Street Flop House, 133 C Street, right across from the not the old Library of Congress, but the annex, the Madison Library of Congress building. It's one of many properties they have in the D.C. area. They also own and operate the George Mason, the Cedars Mansion in North Arlington, Virginia, which has also been the location of a lot of very secretive meetings. Hillary Clinton, when she was First Lady, would go over there when her husband was having all of his travails with the Monica Lewinsky scandal. She would go over there and be ministered to by the head of this group, a guy named Douglas Coe. And in her book, she refers to Douglas Coe as her basic spiritual mentor in Washington. But Douglas Coe is very much a extreme right-winger. He believes in Christian capitalism, that, you make your way to heaven based on how much money you have, and more importantly, how much money you give the fellowship is the name of his group. They sponsor, and they have sponsored for a number of years, the National Prayer Breakfast, which presidents have gone to, and people are under the mistaken belief that group is somehow sponsored. That breakfast is somehow sponsored by the White House, and it's not. It's sponsored by this very secretive Christian cult-like organization, which accounts for Hillary Clinton. Yeah.
The content of this dominionism is that there should be a kind of theocracy where, if not priests, then people who are very religious should rule the political institutions.
Yes. It was actually formulated, this dominionist movement. It's also known as the Reconstructionist movement, by a guy in California named P.J. Rushdoony. Now, he's been dead a few years, but this was his baby, and they've gained a lot of adherents over the years, including the Amundsen family of Nebraska, which had a lot of investments in Nebraska. They were based out of California, and they were part owners of the Omaha World Herald, which did such a terrible job in covering the Franklin scandal, which you mentioned earlier, about 25 years ago. Among other things, taking orphans out of Boys Town near Omaha and trafficking them across state lines for all kinds of illicit purposes.
So if we look at the political establishment now of the state of Nebraska, and we look at the Omaha World Herald, I suppose we have to mention somebody like Warren Buffett, right, the sage of Omaha and Berkshire Hathaway. Yes. They would seem now to be lining up in support of Sasse. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Sasse seems to be getting all the Tea Party money, the American Crossroads, the Karl Rove money, and all the other establishment Republican money, even though he claimed the Tea Party status. Now, he was endorsed by people like Ted Cruz of Texas and Sarah Palin. They support him, but also the more establishment Republican figures like Mitch McConnell weighed in with his support. So what makes him a little different is that he managed to become a consensus candidate, getting support of so-called Tea Party candidates, but also establishment Republican candidates. He has obvious designs on higher office.
On higher office. Hold that thought, Wayne, where the music has come in. It's all automatic here, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes. We have one more 10-minute segment with Wayne Madsen, World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, our final segment here on Friday, June 27th, and we're talking to Wayne Madsen, right, the well-known, highly respected investigative journalist. He's sort of taken over the role that used to be the Washington merry-go-round of Drew Pearson and maybe Walter Winchell and some other people who did critique of the establishment in decades gone by, and we're delighted to have him with us. Wayne, you were just mentioning that Sasse is not simply a candidate for the Senate, but he may be something more. And the hypothesis I would ask you to respond to is this a Manchurian candidate? Remember, Carter came out of nowhere but turned out to be coming from the Trilateral Commission. Obama, something similar, comes out of nowhere, Trilateral Commission. Is that what we have here? And we've got this famous quote about the 45th president. Can you tell us if you found anything about that during your time on the ground there in Nebraska?
Yes, when he was in college, he was basically bragging about this to his friends, saying he was going to be the 45th president of the United States. Well, President Obama is the 44th president of the United States, so it does. Using the math here, he obviously plans to become elected to the U.S. Senate this year, take office in January, and has plans for 2016, if we can believe the rhetoric. And people that say, oh, well, that's nonsense. How could an unknown first-term U.S. Senator hope to become President of the United States? Well, Barack Obama was a first-term U.S. Senator who became President of the United States. So, this has happened before. Abraham Lincoln was a former U.S. representative who became president. So, yes, we have a history of electing people who don't have a whole lot of time in national office, and certainly Sasse seems to have some deep-pocketed contributors, as I say, from this Reconstructionist movement. The other thing that I find troubling is there may be a connection between Sasse and the previous scandal, the Franklin scandal. It was centered around the owner of the Franklin Credit Union, Larry Franklin, which was in Omaha.
Larry King, right?
Larry King.
Larry
right?
King.
Larry King, not to be confused with the former CNN host, Lawrence King. But what we have in this case with Sasse is not only was he in charge of the House page system as a proctor tutor, he also was at the Health and Human Services Department working for Mike Leavitt under George W. Bush. In charge, he was the Assistant Secretary of HHS for Plans and Policy, which would have put him in the political area of HHS. And during that time, the woman who was the head of the Nebraska State Foster Care Board, now her name is Carol Stitt, and she was very, very strong against placing foster kids in any homes where there was even an inkling of impropriety, of sexual abuse. She was well known for that, had been in that job for about 26 years. Well, the current governor of Nebraska, under his watch, Dave Heineman, she was fired by the board. They had packed her board, the governing board for the foster care homes. But originally in 2006, they brought Hatch Act violations against her for attending a Tom Osborne for Governor rally. She's a state employee, not a federal employee, but even if she'd been a federal employee under the Hatch Act, you're allowed to attend rallies. You just can't use your affiliation. You can't use government time or materials to campaign for a candidate. But they said because her office took money from the federal government, from HHS, that she was somehow in violation of the Hatch Act, and that ultimately resulted in her about a year ago being let go by her board. But the actions against her started in 2006. And who was at the HHS providing policy and planning advice to the secretary at the time? None other than Ben Sasse. So here we got him again involved in another area where when children's welfare has been at stake, underage people, their welfare at stake, he's been on the wrong side, both in the House page scandal and in the protection of children in Nebraska, largely resulting from some of the abuses during the Larry King, the Franklin Credit Union scandal.
And maybe if we could, just to fill out the pattern, he was then the president of Midland University, where the athletic director has now been arrested for sexual prostitution.
Basically having sex with cheerleaders with the college football team. Now, Sasse became one of the youngest presidents of any university in the country. Uses this fact in his campaign as look, I can get things done. But yeah, he had that scandal also on his watch as president of this Midland University in Fremont, Nebraska. So yes, there is a pattern. He's campaigning as a family values person. He homeschools his kids. But when you look past the rhetoric, past the nice family photos professionally done on his website, I think people see something a lot more sinister there. Now, the political situation in Nebraska is the Democrats, they've nominated a real lackluster guy, David Domina, who's a trial lawyer, who, a cigar store Indian at a general store in Nebraska would be more animated than this guy. So really the only other candidate who can really differentiate himself from Sasse is Dan Buhrdorf, who I heard just before I came on your program. So I've met with Dan and his supporters, and I think his candidacy could really show that there is an option for the people in Nebraska. You don't have to vote for just another one of these political hacks, but not just a political GOP hack, but somebody with some real nasty baggage in a state that just doesn't need any more of that after the abuses involved with the Franklin scandal. And as you mentioned, some of these children from Boys Town and others in Nebraska were being taken on midnight tours of the White House during the Reagan and George H.W. Bush administration, which prompted Barbara Bush, the first lady at the time, saying, how am I supposed to know who's in the White House at midnight? Well, she's just the first lady and lives there.
Let me just add one thing on this Midland University, right? If you look at this Sandusky phenomenon at Penn State, Sandusky, of course, went to jail, but the president of Penn State was out, and many other officials were out. And in the case of Sasse, he's in the same position as that president of Penn State, forced to quit in one case, but now apparently on his way to the U.S. Senate. So this is a very strange situation.
Yes, and not only that president of Penn State you mentioned, Graham Stanier, his job before he was president of Penn State was he was chancellor at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln.
Ooh. So there's something in Nebraska that we need to scrutinize.
Yes.
And you've been doing it.
They need clean government in Nebraska, and Ben Sasse is anything but clean government. As a matter of fact, he's like a throwback to a really nasty couple of GOP scandals, ones that they wish were erased from the history books. But, anyone who knows anything about the recent history of the Republican Party can't utter that history without mentioning the Franklin scandal. That was plastered over the front page of the Washington Times at the
exactly.
time.
Well, we're out of time. The music is going, and we've got just a couple of seconds left. Thank you very much, Wayne Madsen. It's Wayne Madsen Report. Go there, read it, subscribe. It's worth it. You've got to keep up with the inside stuff. And, of course, in the case of these donors, right, I would appeal to the donors for Sasse. You're going to put your money into this kind of a vessel that could essentially be shattered at any point by one of these scandals coming out. There's more than enough scandal in the past 10 or 20 minutes to put an end to a career. Don't invest in it. See you next week on World Crisis Radio.